Yeah, hey, my relatives. Hello. This is Mark Charles. It is what is it? Friday, December 30. I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee, and I want to have a talk about yesterday, which was the 132nd anniversary of the massacre at Wounded Knee. But before I begin that discussion, I want to do as I always do, which is acknowledge I'm living on Piscataway lands. The land where I live. I moved from the Navajo Nation to Washington, D.C. about almost 8 years ago, 7.5 years ago, and I've been living here with my family. And I just want to acknowledge that these lands are traditional Piscataway lands. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I just want to state how humbled I am uh, to be living on these lands today. So yesterday, December 29, was the 132nd anniversary of the massacre at Wounded Knee. And there's been a lot of things posted about this, a lot of discussion going on about this. And all of these are important things that we need to have a conversation about. But I want to try and take the conversation a little bit deeper. There's a few other things I want to really discuss about this. Hey, I see Shantina's on here. Yate, Shantina, Larry, and Lana. Yate, thank you both for joining me today. It's good to have you here. Um, Glad you could be a part of this discussion. Before we can talk really about some of the challenges with Wounded Knee, I want to talk about some things that have been going on more recently. I'm going to put this article in the chat. It was in the Washington Post. It just came across my news feed over Christmas, which was on Christmas Eve, which was a very cold night here in DC. It was down into the teens. And Many of the southern governors have been shipping migrants from their borders to Democrat controlled states and cities. And one of their popular places to drop these migrants off in Washington, D.C., is at the doorstep of Vice President Harris's home here in Washington, D.C. And on Christmas Eve, there was a bus that was headed to New York, but it wasn't able to get through because of the snow. And so they diverted to DC, and they arrived late at night and literally just unloaded. And migrants from the southern border were uh, taken off the bus. Many of them were not dressed for cold weather, and there was no coordination from the states that sent them to the houses, the people here, so that they could be taken care of. It was just They were just diverted, dropped off, and that's what happens regularly. And it's right. It's very disgusting what is happening with that. But it's been happening for a while now, and so unfortunately, we've grown a little bit used to it here in Washington, D.C. But the other day, this was on the 27th, I saw that Governor Abbott, Greg Abbott from Texas, put this up on his Twitter, and I'm going to just show you the graphic of it, which is he said Texas has bused over 15,900 migrants to sanctuary cities, over 8,900 to DC, 4,900 to New York City, 1,500 to Chicago, and 630 to Philadelphia. We're providing relief to local communities overwhelmed by President Biden's open border policies. This is a political stunt. Greg Abbott doesn't give a damn about these migrants. He's not coordinating with any of these states or cities he's sending them to. He's literally putting them on a bus and shipping them there and dropping them off. He does not give a damn or even acknowledge that he's dealing with people. He is doing a political stunt. He is appealing to his white base in Texas. and he is doing a political stunt, and it's disgusting. It's disgusting. Now, but we know this, right? We've been having discussions about this nationally as these governors, DeSantis and the governor from Arizona and Abbott from Texas, have been doing this for several months now. But what got me the other day on the 27th when I saw this was how blatant he was, literally bragging about it. And it got me thinking about this because we live in a country where white landowning men can publicly mistreat people of color, brag about it publicly, and face very little risk of actually being held accountable for it. Right? If you don't believe how hard it is for our judicial system to hold white landowning men accountable, look at Donald Trump. Look at George Bush. Look at Robert McNamara, who literally admitted he was a war criminal, and yet he was given. Anyway, it's nearly impossible, very, very difficult for our judicial system to hold white landowning men accountable. Because if it did actually hold white landowning men accountable, there would be a public outcry from white landowning men throughout the nation saying, what the crap are you doing? You're not supposed to, these laws weren't meant to hold us accountable. They're meant to keep people of color in line. If you don't believe me, look at Congressman-elect Santos, who tried to play by white rules, lied blatantly during his congressional, and is now beginning to face some scrutiny for that. Probably will oversee an ethics for lying. I promise you, Santos will be held accountable a whole lot quicker than Donald Trump or Greg Abbott ever will. I promise you that. Because again, the system doesn't know, and our leaders don't know and don't want to hold white landowning men accountable. And so several of these men, like Abbott, like others, like Trump, literally brag about the things they can do and get away with, and it doesn't cost them anything politically or in our criminal justice system. They literally get a pass. And so I tweeted a response to that the other day, and I'll share that tweet with you. I'm here, and I'll put it up on, I have a graphic of it too. And I just said I find it disturbing when white people take so much pride in their public and dehumanizing treatment of people of color. Right? Because this is the problem. We live in a system that doesn't know how to hold white men and white people accountable to the same extent it holds people of color accountable. And so therefore they can brag about it. And this is absolutely disturbing. And this is why we need to talk about Wounded Knee. Because this is pretty much the exact same thing. I'm going to read an excerpt from my book on Selling Truth. This is from page 114. What chapter am I in here? I forget. Chapter 7, page 114. On December 29, 1890, approximately 300 Lakota men, women, and children were slaughtered by the U.S. Army. The event is known as the Massacre at Wounded Knee. In the late 1890s, the Lakota people and the U.S. Army were in negotiations at Wounded Knee over the surrender of one of the Lakota chiefs. Neither side trusted the other. The tensions were high. Many weapons were present, and though no one knows exactly who fired the first shot, a shot was fired and chaos ensued. From the heights above, the Army's Hotchkiss guns raked the Indian teepees with grape shot. Clouds of smoke filled the air as men, women, and children scrambled for their lives. Many ran for a ravine next to the camp, only to be cut down in a withering crossfire. When the smoke cleared and the shooting stopped, approximately 300 Sioux were dead. Only 25 U.S. soldiers lost their lives. The Army had brought a battery of 4 Hotchkiss guns to Wounded Knee. These are 42 millimeter guns that shoot 2-pound rounds and have a range of nearly 4,000 yards. As the shooting started, the Army began raining bullets from these cannons down on the Lakota people, many of them running into a ravine to seek shelter from the gunfire. The part of the Wounded Knee story that is often not told is that the U.S. Congress awarded 18 Medals of Honor to soldiers who participated in the massacre. Now, you may have heard that there were 20 Congressional Medals of Honor. That number's out there too. I counted medals as I found them listed. I found 18, but I've heard others, including people like Secretary Deb Harris, or Deb Haaland, say things use the number 20. But in my book, I used 18 because that's the number I had researched. 18 Medals of Honor were awarded to soldiers who participated in the massacre. 3 of those medals were given specifically for flushing the Lakota people out of the ravine. Their citations read as followed: William G. Austin, while the Indians were concealed in a ravine, assisted men on the skirmish line, directing their fire, etc., and using every effort to dislodge the enemy. John C. Gresham voluntarily led a party into a ravine to dislodge Sioux Indians concealed therein. He was wounded during this action. And Albert McMillan, while engaged with Indians concealed in a ravine, he assisted the men at the skirmish line, directed their fire, encouraged them by example, and used every effort to dislodge the enemy. So as Lakota men, women, and children were seeking shelter from gunfire in a ravine, U.S. soldiers went into these ravines and flushed them out. And not only did they not face criminal charges for the blatant war crimes of shooting unarmed men, women, and children, they were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. It is pathetic, the things this nation finds honorable. Not only do we continue to allow people like Governor Abbott to remain in power and do the incredibly inhumane and dehumanizing things that he's doing, but we continue to acknowledge and call heroes these men. 20 Congressional Medals of Honor that have not been rescinded. Even John McCain was on record against not rescinding these medals. And even though it came up in the last presidential election, it's interesting, right? Because at the Native Forum in Iowa, candidates were asked directly about these Medals of Honor. And they said that they would rescind them. But you know who wasn't there and never answered the question? The only one who got elected, right? Joe Biden wasn't there. He didn't have to publicly state that he would rescind these medals. Coward. So, of course, we elected him because we are a nation that finds the mistreatment of people of color honorable. We're a nation that refuses, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, we are a nation who refuses to hold white men accountable for their mistreatment of people of color. Don't even get me started on Abraham Lincoln. So I find it disturbing. Oh, sure, people cry out, oh, we don't like this, but nothing happened. Nothing happened. Others might say, well, Donald Trump's tax returns were released today. He's being held accountable. He's not being held accountable. He's maybe a little embarrassed. He's not being held accountable. I seriously doubt whether the Biden administration has the courage to hold a white landowning male like Donald Trump accountable for an insurrection. I don't think he has the courage to do it. So this is the problem we face as a country, my relatives, which is we are a nation that finds it honorable to mistreat people of color. We've honored it since the beginning of our existence as a nation, and we continue to honor it today, and we refuse to hold people accountable who mistreat people of color. We refuse. And that's what needs to change. And don't get me started, right? The Democrats are not going to do this. They're not going to do this. They're not going to do it. The Republicans obviously are not going to do it. But neither are the Democrats. Do not be fooled. But this is what we have to deal with as a nation, my relatives. This is what we need to wrestle with. I want to share with you the article that I wrote. I wrote this back in 2007. I put this up on my blog. I published it a few places online, but I want to share it with you today. It's called The Massacre at Wounded Knee and 18 Medals of Dishonor. And I encourage you to read it. And I guess there's not much else I can do except ask you to lament this with me. We need to change it. But before we can change it, we need to change public opinion. And while we're slowly growing the number of people who are outraged by these things, there are a lot of people who either don't care or don't think it's important enough to make a fuss about. And that's the problem, is let's just maintain the status quo. We have a lot of work to do, my relatives. Today is it's December 30th. Tomorrow's the 31st, New Year's Eve, and then we go into 2023. I mentioned this in my last second cup of coffee a couple days ago. But one of the things I'm really pondering about 2023 is I'm looking for ways to how can I continue to challenge our nation about the things that we publicly find honorable and begin to change our opinions on those things. And I'm especially looking at Abraham Lincoln, someone who across the board, left and right, Democrats and Republicans, even white versus people of color, a majority of Americans find Abraham Lincoln one of the greatest presidents in U.S. history. And the guy was a blatant, unapologetic white supremacist and one of the most genocidal presidents we've ever had. We're used to calling out people like, we're comfortable with calling out people like Confederate generals. But we refuse to call out white supremacists like Abraham Lincoln. And we need to get better at that. We need to find disgust in the fact that we honor people like Abraham Lincoln. Anyway, this got a little deeper than I anticipated it was going to get. But let me look at what's being said on the comments here. Appreciate everyone being here. Thank you, Pretty Shield, for joining this conversation. Tommy asked, what is the best way to get in touch with you? Facebook DM. I have some ideas about organizing. The best way to get in touch with me, Tommy, because I get a lot of messages that come through my social media. I try to respond to the DMs and stuff like that. But if you go to my website, which is wirelesshogun.com, and I'll actually give you the link here. So this is the question that Tommy was asking. If you go to my website, and let me bring it up right now, there's a contact me page on the About Mark page. And let me find that. It's actually for speaking requests, but you can use it as a way to get in touch with me as well. But it's a good way, because what will happen is this will then go be routed not only to me, but also to people on my staff and people who work with me, and make sure that we see what's being sent. So this is the best way, because then at least, if nothing else, because frequently, even if I see things on social media, I don't have a good way of organizing what I receive there, and so things can very easily slip through the cracks. But if you send that to that contact me page on my website, then it will most likely be brought up with me in a meeting, and we can discuss what we need to do. But anyway, thank you for that question. I want to thank everybody for joining today. There's a lot of things we need to discuss about this. Next month in January, I'm going to be talking about another massacre, which is actually the worst massacre of Native nations in U.S. history, which was the Bear River Massacre of the Shoshone in northern Utah and southern Idaho. And there's a gentleman named Darren Perry, who has been doing a tremendous amount of work to both write about and publicize the events of this massacre. And I would love to try and talk with him. I can't guarantee that, but I definitely want to look at his book and talk about. So his book is called The Bear River Massacre of Shoshone History. And I'm going to be talking about this book more next month. And as we go into it, there's the end of January that massacre happened. So we'll be talking about that in the next month or so. But anyway, I want to thank you all for joining me today. I can't have my relatives for being willing to engage in this dialogue. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you have a great New Year's. Please keep yourself safe. If you are going to be celebrating with alcohol or other things that would impair your decision making, please make sure you make arrangements so you can get home safely. Please be safe, respect your own life and the life of your loved ones, and yeah, have a good, safe, and wonderful New Year's holiday. And I will probably be back on next week. I don't think I'm going to. Well, I may be doing a few things tomorrow for my Patreon, so I'll be announcing that. I'll be talking about that later today on my as I'm sending out some stuff over my Patreon. But yeah, other than that, I'll probably be on next year sometime again. But walk in beauty, my relatives, and may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.